Hello, Shane. Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm good. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me on again.
No, pleasure, pleasure. Thanks for filling up the slot. Actually, one of the guy pulled out. He had some personal issues, which is fair enough. All of us are senior guys, and we do book it like couple of quarters ahead, and commitments can come in. Thanks for jumping in and making this slot fill up.
No problem. Hey, I'm looking forward to it. It's kind of a subject that's close to my heart anyway. So, as
Cool.
always, I'm sure to have an opinion.
Awesome. Yeah, because last week on our panel discussion, we had this session. What is the impact of not having a data foundation? So we all discussed this, four, five panelists, and people really liked it. This time, people always forget to click like on YouTube, but they always send messages one to one that they really like it. What is the importance of data foundation? But one obvious question start coming in: what is data foundation? Because for different people, data foundations are different. Like data governance is data foundation, but data governance is huge. Then data modeling also comes into data foundation. There are tons of number of data modeling techniques going in. So people are asking what it is. So you said you want to jump in, you want to solve this puzzle. Floor is all yours, Shane. Let's start it. What's in your mind?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've solved it, but I've been working on it for a few decades and I've got a set of what I call patterns and pattern templates. So, and kind of, I think about it like this. So, my view, and it comes back to semantics, it's all part of data management.
Mm.
So, our foundational patterns, patterns in governance, our patterns in engineering, our patterns in platform, our patterns in way of working, they all kind of, for me, come under that term data management. And the reason I say that is I don't like this idea that there's a separate data governance group and a separate data team. That siloed behavior causes us massive problems. And so for me, it's all within the same way of working. We may organizationally have our data team structures slightly different, where people are focused and for scaling reasons they're in separate pods or groups.
Mm.
But I think governance is part of management. Yeah. And if we're not governing our data, then we're not managing it. So that's the first thing if I kind of look at it from that lens. And then I look at kind of subdomains within data management. And, we have ones which are around architecture and platform. And so when people say foundation, what I typically hear them talking about is technology foundations. I need a cloud analytics database. I need an ETL tool. And what often happens in an organization is I'll get asked to come in and do some work with them, either on a greenfields environment where they're starting from scratch again, or they haven't had a data management capability or platform before, or a brownfields one where they come in and ask me to do an architecture review. And as an ex-technologist, my natural reaction is to get into the technology, right? Oh, that's what they've asked me to do. Come in and look at our architecture, look at our platform, look at our tooling. And what I've learned over the decades of doing this is we need to step back and we need to look at some other things as well. We need to look at our way of working. We need to look at what our strategy and our team design is. And so over the years, I've kind of been building out this data blueprint template and set of patterns that I use. And what I've learned is the first foundational question that I always ask now, regardless if it's greenfields or it's brownfields or why I'm being brought in, is what is the definition of success? Yeah, so if we're going to spend this money, right, in terms of tooling and technology and people and change, and even if we're using open source, uh, let's not tell ourselves it's free, right? Yes, there may not be a license cost up front, but the five data people are going to cost you $1 million in salary for a year if you're in the US, right? So there is a cost there. So let's say we spent that year, we delivered everything we promised. Yeah, we made the changes that we needed to make. What's the measures of success? Like, what's actually going to happen? And for me, I want to keep them really simple. For me, they're just up arrows or down arrows. And I'm looking for things like, when I often hear, we want self-service. I'm like, well, that's not a measure of success, right? That's just a tool. It's a pattern. So what does that give you? Oh, actually, we get quicker time to decision. Ah, okay, right. So now what you're saying is the time taken to make decisions in the organization based on data reduces, right? Down arrow. Good. Or we don't need to talk to the data team. Yeah, cool. That's a process thing. What's the measure of success? Oh, again, we can make decisions quicker. Okay, so we're still back on that down arrow. Or how do we want to measure we're successful with that? Okay, well, the number of requests going to the data team is reduced. Yeah. Or maybe we say, actually, it's not self-service is not the tool we're going to use to deliver that measure of success. Maybe the data team are just going to get better and faster at answering questions. Yeah. So the time to decision still goes down, but the tool we use, the thing we measure is how quickly the data team respond and answer that question. Yeah. And that should go up, right? We should be faster and faster. Yeah. Less time or more questions answered. And so that's the first foundational piece I always think an organization should do. If we make this investment, what actually changes in our organization? What are the measures of success? What are the indicators, the arrows that are either going to go up or down that we can then prove that that investment was worth it? And I see lots of people not doing that foundational piece. What have
Yeah.
you seen?
No, absolutely, absolutely. As I mentioned the other day, right? I have come up with this canvas, which is, of course, influenced by your canvas, where you have come last time we had 1 year back, we had this session, right? So you're absolutely right. I always ask, first of all, everybody knows what is value, but value is very subjective for me. Everyone want to create a value. There's no doubt about it, right? You ask anyone there, yeah, we have a value. But how this value come up? So you need to have questions, answers. Based on the answer, you need to have actions, and based on the action, what you will actually have in your hand. Tangible, measurable. That's I also look into it. So that's also my first step. I always start with the canvas where I say upfront. Okay, let me put it in a different way, right? I know because as you mentioned, whenever you go and talk to people, people are normally talking about technology. Normally, they have new generative AI, agentic AI. We want to do something with it, right? We have a car. There's a new car in the market we want to buy. The question is why you want to buy the car, right? So you need to have those things in your hand. So yes, for me, that foundation is also you put up your questions and answer the ones you are already be doing. Normally, people want to explore new things. I tell them, do what you already are doing and how you can improve it. If you do not know the measure of improving it, forget about the new things. I start from there. Once they know, okay, we have been doing this with X technology or maybe Y technology, and it has been giving us this value, but we need to go next level. Okay, let's discuss. But what you're achieving. So that's how I also start.
Yeah, I use a framing that's similar but slightly different, maybe. So let me talk through those. And it comes from the struggle that most data teams have differentiating between the products they're building, if they're a product team, or the dashboards they're building, if they're not. But the things they're building, right, are the things they're building using data and information that solve business problems, help drive decisions, actions, outcomes, and value. And so they're like boxes of cereal, right, on the shelf. Cocoa Pops, Honey Puffs, right? They're things that people are going to tangibly buy in your organization and use because it has value to their lives. And so we've got these products, and then we've got the foundations of how we work. It's the factory that builds those products. And data's a funny thing, right? We kind of crass people that have a factory. We want to build everything as a factory, fully automated, but for some reason the data's always so shitty or the requirements are always so new that actually we can't just cookie cut a factory that works as a bunch of machines. So it's this blend of artisan and automation. And people tend to confuse the foundational work around that factory and that way of working with the products we produce. And then what they'll do is they'll tend to focus on one or the other. Let's do a founder. I don't know how many times you heard this. Let's do a foundational build, right? Let's go spend 12 months, it's always 24, to build in the foundation, change the technology, build in a lake, right? And the problem with that is there's no value to the organization. Yeah, like if we were building a physical factory, then maybe you could go and say, there's some steel, there's a roof, there's some machines, we're getting there. But the problem with data is we We don't show how we're building out that factory way of working. Um, and so 18 months later, we've built our technology foundation in our factory, but we've delivered no value to the organization, and that causes a major problem. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is we just build ad hoc products. Yeah, we go in and we just build a product and deliver value, right? Great. But then we get no automation, no change to our way of working, no ability to scale. And as we add more and more of those products, the business as usual overhead of maintaining and just bleeds all the effort out of the team. So what we want to do is we want to balance those two things. Yeah, we want to build out the foundations at the same time we're delivering value. And that's hard because if you think about what we're doing is we're building the plane as we're flying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And tell me any other industry where we do that, right? It's kind of, you don't go, if you're a surgeon, you don't go into an operating theater that's empty and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to do open bypass heart surgery, but I'm also going to build the machine that pumps the blood around, right? And design the scalpel. And so we've got to realize that we have to work on both of those things together. And an easy way to think about it is people always talk about people, process, culture, and technology. Yeah. So the reason I'm looking left is I'm looking at my blueprint, right, and just going through all the bits that I make sure I fill out because that's the foundational
Yeah.
building blocks or patterns that I use. And so if we think about the people, process, and technology, the thing we don't focus on after we've got our measures of success is the team design, right? A version of the operating model. And that's the next thing I always do as a foundational piece is I go, what are the personas in our organization? Do we have this idea of data stewards or not? Yeah. And what do they actually do? Do we have a data engineer or an analytics engineer? Like, what's the language if we've already got a team that we already have? And how do they operate together? What's their team design? Using things from team topologies. Are we working in small squads? Are we working in bigger teams? Do they do end to end? Do they do handoffs? And for me, that's the next foundational piece of work because by documenting the team design and that flow of work, we get a foundational piece of visual hints on how the way of working is going to happen. And we can do that relatively quickly and early, right? We don't have to overbake it. And once we have that, then we can go into the next stage, right? Which is what other foundational pieces do we need in place? But to come back, ways of working and building products that have value, they're two things that have to happen together. Otherwise, we get ourselves in trouble with our stakeholders. Quite rightly, because we're not adding value.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Actually, then what you are going towards is data governance because nowadays I'm building a kind of data governance strategy for someone, right? They asked me to build them this thing. I said, okay, let me build it for you. So their first question was, what framework you will bring in? What tangible thing we will have in our hand? I said, no, you can't start from the what. First, you need to understand what is why, then how you're going to do it, and then the technology comes in. They start asking me which tool you will use. I said, stop, not a tool. Don't talk about tools. First, go towards governance, because nowadays we have been discussing this CDO role, Chief Data Officer, right? So, like, what this role will do is they will create a data strategy with the business. They will create a data governing strategy with themselves and the, of course, data stewards. And then there's a data management strategy comes in. These three things come right. Of course, first is business strategy, then data strategy, then governance strategy, and then data management strategy, right? So what you are going toward is, yes, as I previously just mentioned that I normally tell them, hey, if you want to do something, a data product, let's take an example, how you are doing things now. People normally forget about it. People think that, let's take an example of generative AI. A tool came in. Hey, let's bring the tool and let tool give the tool the data and let tool tell us what use cases they can bring it out, right? That was the reason failure of generative AI. So I told them, no, tell me, even if you are doing manual, get me with your data analyst. What you are doing manually or semi-manually or maybe something else. Let's see that, which is the actions can be manual or semi-manual XYZ. And then automated. And from that practices, then personas will come out, stewards will come out, processes will come out. So processes has to be predefined processes. It cannot be you bring a tool and tool will bring a process. you need to have a process minus technology. What do you think?
So I think there's a whole lot of bundle in there, right? So let me
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of unpack it. So I think one of the points you raised, and it's a point I kind of missed, is one of the first things I'll do when I'm working with an organization on their foundations is I will observe. Yeah, because I want to understand what the current state is, because it gives me a whole lot of hints. If it's a greenfields, sorry, if it's a brownfield environment, right, I'll observe the data team. I'll observe the way they work. I'll do some workshops with them to understand that. I'll talk to the stakeholders to see where their real pains are.
mm,
If it's greenfields, I'll still do the same thing because even though there's not a data team and there's not a data platform, there's a whole lot of data work, right? It's just
yes,
been done
yes.
in Excel and
Somebody else is
outside.
still
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Somebody's doing the data work, right? Normally. And I will create some very light artifacts around current state. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that helps us understand what those measures of success are, right? What we have to change. And if we change things, what success, if we make those changes, looks like. Second point is, and you kind of mentioned it, is the data strategy is just a story on how we're going to execute the business strategy.
Yeah.
So if somebody comes in and says, do a data strategy, it's like, well, what's the business strategy?
Yeah.
And if I get a slide that makes no sense to me, the conversation then is, well, I don't understand how we're going to tell a story around how data is going to achieve that because that doesn't, I don't understand the strategy.
Mm,
Like what's measure of success for the organization? Make more money, reduce costs, reduce risk. Yeah, great. But actually, what are we going to do, right? Like, what actions in the next 2 years are we going to increase market share? Are we going to sell more products? Are we going to reduce cycle time for a patient coming into a hospital, right? Like, what actually is our strategy and our roadmap to achieve it? And from there, we can say, right, how does data support it? What I see happen a lot, and again, one of the things I do when I come into an organization, do the blueprint, the first thing I ask them is, could you please give me the 4 other data strategy documents that you've had from 4 other data consulting companies? Because they'll be really useful. And they say, why? And then my standard joke is, I just want to know whether triangles, circles, squares, or matrices are the flavor of the month right now. But that's not really the reason. The reason is there's always good information in there.
mm,
They've spent some time with some good people to create this document that's a strategy, and that is valuable. It shortcuts how much work we have to do going forward. We still need to revalidate it and make sure it's not out of date. But the reason they have 4 other ones is because they got a PowerPoint deck with some pretty pictures that tells them a strategy, and there is no execution plan. There is no roadmap. There is no measures. I'm going to come back to it. No measures of success. There's nothing telling them whether their strategy is working or not and whether they should change it. So based on all that, the other thing I talk about is the blueprints we do should be light. Yeah. So we got this, again, big design up front problem. We kind of want to set a bit of a blueprint, which is a vision of the future and how we're going to get there. Measure success, team design, architecture, ways of working, processes. But we don't want to spend a year doing that because a year of that work has minimal value. So we've got to be able to do these light artifacts, right? And then iterate them as we go forward. And then I'll come back to the last one, right? Data stewards. So my question there I always have for an organization is, okay, if our team design has a role or a persona called data steward, and we know what they're going to do, right? What their job is, what their persona is, what their role is, what their skills are, what changes? And what will happen, right, is I will often hear we get better data quality. And then I'll go back to the team design. I'll go, really? So what we got, right, is we got this data governance group, and this is typically in a large enterprise, right? Data governance group over here, data team over here, data management across the top. And you're telling me that the steward is going to change the quality of the data. Because, hell, the ETL developer going in there and writing code in DBT, right? Yeah, they got no accountability on quality.
yeah.
It's just wrong, right? And so we got to tie it back to that foundational piece of if that metric, if that measure of success of increased data quality, whatever that means, improves, like which group of people are responsible in the team design and the way of working for making that change. And that's how I think about it, right? Like almost like Lego pieces. We're kind of plugging them in, and the problem is the Lego pieces are always correlated. Your team design, your measure of success, they change the way you work. They change the way the factory works. They change the technologies you need. My classic one in the last couple of years, put in a data catalog.
Mm,
Well, yeah, being visible context for an organization has value. But let's just start talking about, well, what's the team design for the catalog, right? What's the measure of success? Is it number of data assets logged? I'd say that was a weak measure. So you can see how they all kind of, the foundational pieces all kind of interrelate. And you've got to be really good at choosing small versions of each of them and then iterating them and see how they then work or don't work with all the other foundational pieces. And then you kind of doing systems thinking, right? You're tuning the overall system of the organization over
mm.
time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So for me, this is the first part, right? Because what you're referring is when we start a journey, what we need to do, we need to understand the success factor, as you mentioned, the MIS. I call it decisions. Nowadays, I've started talking like four eras. We had operationalization era where this all ERP, SAP, OLTP applications came in. The second era was analysis era, which brought in data warehousing, star schema, Snowflake, blah, blah, blah. Then third era was analytical era. Analytical era is data mining, predictions, forecasts, data science stuff. Now the current era, what I define is a decision era. Everything has to start with a decision. What you want to do? Starting point, what decisions will be impacted with this initiative? And from that, everything tickle back. You can bring it back. Okay, I'm going to take a decision like by go on to cloud from on premises to cloud. That's the one decision. Now, what you need, I will find it out for you. So that's the starting point, foundational that the starting point of your journey. Now let's go to the next step. Next step will be your. I would like to bring your canvas into it because once you go into artifacts, do you think, I think you will say that, and I want to emphasize on it, and I'm following that as well. After my canvas, where I finalize a product or a requirement, next my canvas is your canvas, by the way, which I take to the canvas or to the customer and start asking questions. And as in your book you mentioned, the moment you customers start thinking about something else, stop over there. Whatever is on top of their mind, that is what your initial requirement should be. Tell us about that foundation stuff.
Yeah. So it's interesting when you said the word decision, I naturally took to a business decision using data because
Yeah.
I'm a data person, right? So I'm like, which decision do you want to take? And then I naturally went, well, actually, we're in the era of decision right now, but we're accelerating so fast. We're going to be in the wave of the era of action next, right? We're going to stop talking about decisions and which action needs to be automated. So that's where I went, right? And then you qualified it with a decision around a change we have to make. And that for me is the key, right? Is this idea that we're changing something, changing the way we work, we're changing the way the team's designed, we're changing the technology we use.
Mm,
And so I start more and more talking about change as kind of the thing we're focused on because decisions and actions, as I said, always takes me back to the data world of the product we're building, not our foundational way of working. And then, of course, we get into change management, which has been around for a long, long time, and business process reengineering, and we brings back patterns that have had value and we kind of lost, but we won't go there. So the way I think about the next step is I think about value streams and factories. And so a value stream is the end-to-end process from when a stakeholder knows they have a problem and they put their hand up, I have a problem, I need some help, and it needs some data, to when we deliver something of value that solves that problem. And that is the process that involves things like problem statements, ideation on how we might solve it, discovery of requirements, prioritization, the left hand side of what I call my continuum, which is, and I'm a great fan of product thinking in that space, right? So, not IT thinking, not projects, not Raskis, not all those things that we get from the IT domain. I'm a great fan of pulling out patterns from the product domain on the left-hand side of that. So identify the problem, ideate how we could solve it, discover which solution is going to be the most viable, prioritize which one we're going to work on next. And then the right-hand side of my value stream is around design, build, test, and deploy and value. right? And then maintain. So we kind of lost designing in our data domain a while ago with the modern data stack. Sure as shit with AI now, we're going to be bringing it back in because those designs are actually the context or the knowledge that LLMs need to do the work without us. So that design, build, deploy, maintain value phase. And so I want I want the blueprint to have really simple what we call nodes and links. Like just think of them as stickies and lines. Like
Mm.
who's defining the problem space? And if I have a problem as a stakeholder, how do I engage the data team? Or do I not? Do I have a team of BAs back to the organizational design, team design? How do they get into the ideation phase, right? How do we know how we might solve it? How much time are we going to spend on each one of those? All the way through. And then I couple that with the factory process. And that is, as the data team, okay, I understand now which problem I'm going to work on. What's my process? Do I naturally just go and grab the data first? Yeah. Or do I grab, see what data is available and mock up something and give some feedback? Or do I go grab all the data or a thin slice? Yeah. What's my data layered architecture? Which layers am I having? Which ones are rules I have to comply with? What tooling do I have available? How do we hand off the work between the team members in that factory? How do we test it? Yeah, how do we deploy it? So that all the way from I got to touch a bit of data because I know what the problem I've got to solve is to I've deployed something that somebody can use and it has some value. And so I'm a great fan of a thing called TEDx talk called How to Make Toast. And it's just a visualization way of doing systems thinking. And so as part of that foundation, I'll get the data teams and the organization to work through those two value streams, right? Those two flows of steps, nodes, and links. And so when we do that, what that also allows us now is to visualize where we're about to make change
Mm.
because we can start basically voting and say, well, part of the value stream is broken. So perfect example. If I look at somebody's prioritization queue, their backlog, and they've got 554 Jira tasks in their backlog queue, and some of them have been sitting there for a year, I would say we have a problem on the left-hand side. Yeah, around ideation, discovery, or prioritization. And then we probably also have a problem on the right hand side around our factory that it's too slow to move the work, but we want to focus on the left, right? We have a whole lot of work there that can't be a priority because we haven't built it. If we look at the way the team work in the data factory, we can see blockers, right? We can see that this piece of work seems to sit in the factory for too long. If you think about it as a product, like a actual factory building cereal, making cereal, we can watch the machines and we can bring in some lean thinking and see how long they take. And again, we can go back to measurement. The time between these two things takes too long. Like, what can we do to reduce the time? Is that more humans, more automation, doing less? They're all choices we can make. So I come back to your point around change, right? We want to visualize the system in those two different ways, and then we want to make conscious decisions on what we're going to experiment in changing. And that's the last point. They're experiments. We have a hypothesis, right? If I change this thing, then good things will happen. And sometimes bad things happen, right? My favorite one. Let's bring 3 more people into the team because we're a bit behind on building our products. Okay, let's think that through, right? We're going to bring somebody in and we're going to put them on the ground with the team. And let's assume we don't have a lot of documentation around the way we work or the way our systems work. So now they've got to learn our way of working. They've got to learn our technology systems. They've got to learn our domain. And how's that going to work? Well, the team doing the work right now are going to spend half their time bringing those people up to speed. Now, in theory, they'll help us accelerate in the future. But right now, that change is going to cost us 3 months of working
Yeah.
slower.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Right? Because, that's the reality of that hypothesis. Yeah. So I'm with you, right? In your foundational space, think about changes, right? Changes should result in things being better, faster, quicker, more fun, easier, those kind of words. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, yeah, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. Before we go to governance and data management, egg and chicken thing, right? I have those questions as well. But let's brainstorm this data product concept as well, just for our audience as well, and just to hear out your your thoughts are on it, because as we mentioned, the previous errors were about project errors. We build a project, we start a project, we build everything from end to end, centralized, and we wish that we can do something out of it, right? That was projects. And then this product era comes in, which we still feel is there. For me, I want to data product is perfect. You can have a data product, or you can have a data as a product, whatever you want to call it. But decision, I want to bring in decision, right? Because why sometimes I conflict with data product or software engineering practices is because you're again creating a product. Product may or may not work. I want to attach, just to share my thought, right? You can comment on it. I want to attach a decision with a data product. I don't want to start a data product without a decision, because you can create a product, you can have a super good dashboard or a report or slicing and dicing, and you end up having no decisions benefit on top of it. So what's your thought on it, that die your data product has to map with a decision rather than analysis or analytics?
Yeah. So a little bit of semantics, right? Just for people listening, so that when I use different words, they know kind of where I'm at. So in my language, an information product is a boundary of a whole lot of things: data, code, everything, visualization in a little box that solves a business problem. Yeah. So that's what I call an information product. When I use the word data product or something like that, I'm talking about a data asset. I'm talking about a table, right? That data asset, I tend to find data products shouldn't, but they tend to become just tables, right? They're data assets. So that's my language, right? And yeah, we've all had arguments around data product thinking, data as a product, right? And so I always think you just got to anchor your definitions so that when you're talking, people are clear what you're saying, right? It's kind of the English to French problem.
Yeah.
But I'm with you, right? When I talk about an information product, I talk about the problem to be solved, the
Mm.
decision to be made, the action that will happen, that needs to be happen based on that decision, the outcome that will happen if I take that action and it's successful, and the value that will be realized if that outcome is positive. And so that's my thinking frame, right? And that comes from the product world. And then I make in the canvas, which is a requirements gathering template, I change the language from decision to business question,
Yeah.
because I've found that if I say to a stakeholder, what decision do you need to make, I don't tend to get good answers back. Yeah, I tend to get fluffy words that I don't understand, and I can't figure out how we can give them information to support that decision. Not always, right? But 9 times out of 10. If I ask them what business question they want to answer with data, and they start with who, how long, how many, how much, where, why, I will get back 5 to 10 good business questions.
Mm.
And the things like, how many customers do we have? Which channel are they coming from? And how much money do we make out of them? Yeah, they're good business questions.
Yeah.
I can then ask them, okay, if I answer those business questions, what action will you take?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll identify the customers with low margin and which channel they're coming from. And the action we'll take is either remove that channel or put investment in to make the people coming through that channel more profitable. Right. So what I've gone from is a business question to an action, and then the outcome and the value. And there's a decision in between, right? You're making a decision to shut that channel down, or you're making a decision to invest in those customers through that channel to increase margin. But it's kind of inferred, right? Now, what's interesting in the AI world is with LLMs, does that change the model, the pattern, right?
Mm.
And I haven't finished that work, because what would happen if I told the LLM that this action I wanted to make, is that enough now? And these are questions I haven't answered, right? Because we're moving into the action era, right? We're moving away from the decision era, and we're moving into the action wave. I think is where the world will go. But yeah, so that's where I'm at, right? I talk about business questions that you need to answer, and then what action will you take if you answer it, and then I get really strong requirements that a data team can build based off.
Awesome. Awesome. We are on the same page till now. Now let's
Yeah.
go to the next stage. Because normally what we have just defined in last Hey, we move so quickly, huh? It's already 35 minutes. So fun, right? This is what normally I call it when I went into your canvas when we had a discussion. What you're doing, it's by right, it should be an obvious thing for me. You start any journey, all these things should be obvious, but people have forgotten about it because there were time pressure. There are so many pressures and they want to do it things very quickly. That's why they forgot about these things. What your canvas says, right? You have to start with why and then how and what, all those traditional stuff. Now let's go. Okay, we as a customer says, okay, we agree with you that we have to define these basics. Now what? Now what is next stage of data foundation? Because the moment you have a data strategy, which we just discussed, why thing, everything, now there's a governance and in parallel there's management, data management, two things underneath, right? That is where I feel is an egg in chicken. Because if you create governance, which include principles, uh, prac- prin- uh, uh, principles, policies, procedures, metrics, tools, and responsibility, all those things, right? That you define and you are telling your workers, do it. But sometimes what happens, doing ground reality is much different as compared to what you define. Now you go the other way. You say, okay, let's build something and learn from there and then create a governance practice policies, blah, blah, blah. I normally give an example. You have a new colony, you have a open land, people came and start building houses. In the middle, you have a road car can go through. You don't have any barriers, any hurdles over there. But once kids comes out, they can run across the roads. Now you need to have a policy or you need to have something or maybe a divider across both sides so kids cannot go through. Now kids grows up, they start playing, they play with cricket. We both know cricket with hardball and this stuff that can damage the cars who are going fast. Now you create bigger balls. So now these are the best practices or experience coming in, which goes into a governance documentation that if you build a new road, you need to follow this, right? So it's like egg and chicken thing. That is where normally wherever I'm talking, they are confused. What is foundation? Because if we build upfront, we might not need it. But if we bring later, maybe it's already broken and we go under compliance. Where to start? Governance or management practices? Maybe a tough one.
So remember, in my language, governance is part of management. I'll just keep reinforcing that. So this is really interesting, right? And this is something I'm working on right now, and I kind of think I have a set of patterns now, but I'm just testing them. And it's one I've struggled with for decades, right? Because it comes back to this idea of building the plane while you're flying it, right? Like how much of the plane needs to exist. And experimented for years around this and never really got traction. And so the framing of the pattern that I have in my head right now is this idea of pioneers and town builders.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to decide which of those two patterns is your organizational culture. And
Mm.
that is a decision that you need to make upfront because that frames everything else. Now, everything else is just a Lego block, right? It's a pattern template. And I'm doing lots of work on those at the moment. For a whole reason, I mean, we could talk about in a minute around why I think templates actually help solve the problem that we had, which is we lost a lot of our domain expertise when we went to democratization, when we brought more people into our domain to do the work that we used to do as experts.
Mm-hmm.
We lost the education, we lost the training, and that was a bad thing, but it was also a good thing. So I think we have to teach people to do the work we used to do in ways that had value. Maybe not the ways we used to do them, but in the same pattern that had value. Like data design, right? We should always do a light data design because it is a valuable thing, but we don't need to spend 6 months doing an enterprise data model anymore. So I think these pattern templates are actually the unlock to teach people to do what we've got taught over decades to do. But I'll go back to pioneers and town builders. So are we going to go out and experiment heavily, find things that work, find things that don't, and then start codifying those into our town and build the town after we've pioneered the settlements?
Mm.
Is that our culture? Or Do we want to actually build the town and then get people to come and live in it? Right? Is that our culture? Now, when we build the town, again, we can't spend 2 years building the town before we let them come, right? So we've still got to do it in an iterative and in a way that has agility. So let's say that that's a culture decision and it's an important one. And then what I can go back to is I can take that decision that an organization has done and I can look at our team design, our measures of success, our value stream, and our data factory processes that we think we're going to run with and go, well, you told me that you're going to be pioneers. And yet I see heavy team design, heavy value stream processes, right? So you actually, that's not your culture. Like one of those two things is out of sync and we need to fix it. And so then, okay, let's say that we pioneer or we're town builders. The key thing is we have to think about principles, policies, and patterns. Those are the three P's that I use. And so, again, to anchor my language, a principle is like a culture thing. It's like an agile manifesto. It's we prefer this over that. You know, we prefer small teams of 3 over big teams of 10. Yeah, we prefer delivering value earlier, even though it's riskier, than waiting 3 months and delivering value later that is higher quality. Yeah, or we prefer delivering value later with high quality over early with high risk. Right? They're just principled decisions that we want to make, and they set the culture of the team and the way the organization works with data.
Hmm.
Policies for me are immutable rules. They are things we will get fired for. Yeah. So
Hmm.
you should never store a customer's name, date of birth, and passport number in clear text.
Yeah.
Right? That is a policy, but we have to enforce that policy. So if I ever see a customer name, date of birth, and passport number in an Excel spreadsheet, then we've broken that policy, and the person who's done that should be censured or fired, right? And
Hmm.
what happens though is when we talk about data foundations and especially data governance, we treat policies as wishes, right? And I've done it, right? I used to write
Yeah.
these principle and policy documents that were massive and they were kind of rules, but nobody ever got fired. You know, I worked for a bank and they had all these policies, and yet I saw them posting a customer's name, their account number, and their last transaction in a Teams chat
Oh,
because
teams.
that was the yep, because that was the only way that team could solve the problem for that customer at the right time.
Hmm.
And so they were breaking the policy. Now, the reason they broke the policy was because no other system was in place that let them solve the problems and they had to solve it. So they solved it with the tools they had.
Hmm.
But what we should be saying is that team's breaking the policy. What do we need to do to change what that team's doing so they actually don't break the rules? Yeah. So policy is very small, targeted set of rules. Like you said, the police state, police things, you can't drive a car at 200 k's an hour past a school road, during school time, or you will be locked up in prison, right? Quite rightly. So that's that. And then patterns are all the other things that are useful. Yeah, they're typically what I see people write policies as. If you do this, it's valuable. If you do this, it's useful. You should kind of do that. And that's what I look at, those three Ps: principles, things we should subscribe to, this versus that, um, policies, rules that I'll get fired if I actually break them. And so I'll come back to that. If we say that that's the rule, then we either need to automate detection of when we break the policy or have auditors in our organization that will go out and audit that those policies aren't being broken. If you don't enforce the policy, then actually it's not a rule, right? It's a wish. And then patterns, what we should do is have people that share their patterns or people that define their patterns. So let's take that back to the idea of pioneers and town builders. So if I've got a pioneer organization, yeah, then I'm expecting to set some principles up front, some this versus that. I'm expecting those pioneers to iterate around the patterns, and then I'm expecting to discover the policies that are important. Yeah, because they're going to do some things that are wrong. And then I'm going to go, yeah, no, actually, we need to harden that. Right. And so we'll then bring that back into a policy. If I'm a town builder, I would expect the principles, policies, and patterns to be built by the town building team, the data team, as they work. Yeah, still iteratively, not 2 years up, big build up front, but I'd be expecting them to do that work. So then it comes back to team design, right? Because what I'm then saying is data governance is just a skill and a set of roles within the people doing the data management work. It's not a separate team.
Mm.
But you can make it work. If you're a town building organization, you can have a separate governance team, like a team of architects or a team of town planners from the council that make sure you're actually building buildings of high quality that aren't going to fall down in the next rain, right? But you've got to decide which of those you are and then bring in everything else to align with that way of working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But I want to throw a challenge over here in my
Yeah.
point of view as well regarding governance and data management, right? As you correctly mentioned that when we are doing stuff, then then governance, as you mentioned, is part of the management, right? But and you gave an example of pioneer or greenfield or brownfield kind of stuff, right? But for me, in data world, right, because everyone wants data, decisions on data or value out of data. And for me, there might not be any organization. It's really hard to say that anyone who do not have data. Everyone have data, and everyone have one or the other way data management practices already there. Because we have come from four eras: operationalization, analysis, analytics, and now decision. You're saying actions as well, but I bring action under the umbrella of decision, right? Because without any action, decision cannot happen, right? So now the thing is, I want to bring this angle into it, that era where you do things and learn and create practices and policy, as you correctly mentioned, I always principle, policies, and procedures or patterns, these things, right? I think these templates are already there. I think that is where I am already also telling customers that either you are domain specific, you are banking or telco or some one of the domain you are holding, and there are a lot of patterns and templates already there. So I am on the other side of the table with apologies to you is I don't want to mix governance with management, because if you merge governance with management, governance change based on what you're doing. I feel we have come out of that era where governance practices are already matured. I feel you can bring up the template which by the SME subject matter expert, as you mentioned. Last time, subject matter experts were the one who were doing something. Now we brought other domain people into the data world so they can do things for us, and that is where I think they're all chaos started happening, right? So I feel data governance it's kind of a law. You're creating a town. The data governance is law and legislations, whatever you want to call it, and management is doing the construction. Now there are best practices. When you're building a town, you already know which kind of housing society you're going to have, which kind of malling you're going to have. You need to have a police station, you need to have how many hospitals, how many pharmacies you want to have. So I feel this team need to be little small team. I'm not saying a bigger team. Small team of governance need to be there, and there has to be domain expert and they have to be data savvy. Well, you can say I'm a biased person for a data because I'm from data. I always emphasize that in data governance, data people need to be there, because once data people there, they already know what they are building, and they can create principles, policies, and procedures and patterns based on their past experiences. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think we are already 10 minutes left already. Do you have a hard stop?
No, no, I'm good. I'm good. So we can carry on if that's okay with you.
Yeah, do stop me because I'm just throwing my ideas because I'm building a data
Yep.
governance strategy for someone. So I was telling them, bring up the best practices, right people, because skill set is very important. Nowadays, because of AI is a black box. It creates something. I have an example I gave into last panel discussion. I'll give it to you now as well for your thought process, right? That if you don't have this, then everybody will do whatever they want to do based on their experiences, and you will have multiple flavors of data governance. If I go with your mindset that data management need to have a data governance, do you see this risk, multiple flavor of governances,
Yeah. Yeah.
or you
But
don't mind that?
no, I do mind it, but I think it's the reality at the moment.
Yeah,
Again, I'm going to slightly disagree with you, but agree with you at the
absolutely.
same
I
time.
want to I want to hear it out so I
Okay.
can.
So So I'm going to put a stake in the ground and then I'll talk around it and come back to it that I don't believe we have data governance. I don't believe I've ever seen it, right? Um, and let me justify that. So if I'm in an enterprise organization, we have financial governance,
Yeah.
right? Like we have people who are accountable, CFO, to make sure that our financial records are accurate
Mm.
and we don't overspend. And then they have a bunch of principles, policies, and patterns that help them do that job. They have a thing called a profit and loss. It is a pattern that every accountant applies, like a balance sheet, like a trial balance, like a cash flow statement, that is part of their practice. Yeah,
Mm.
as part of their way of working. You get qualified as an accountant, you know what those patterns are, you apply them, you are audited by them, you are held to account. They are governing artifacts.
Correct.
In the data domain, we have Jack. We have data modeling, but you can have any flavor you want and you don't even have to follow it. We never audit any of our data models, right? You can say that you're storing data encrypted, but does anybody ever audit you? You know, you can say that you can't do this, but then people go and do it. And that's part of the problem. And then if we take our town plan, you know, the idea of building a city,
Mm.
we have governance because there is normally a council, a regulatory body that says if we agree that you're allowed to build that town, here's the rules. You know, you have to have a school, you have to have buildings that aren't more than 3 stories high. And that governance body has power to punish you if you don't follow the rules. In
Okay.
my experience, it's very rare for a data governance group to have power in an organization. Now, in some organizations it does, but I find that in my experience a very rare occurrence. And so I then say back to my stake in the ground, I don't think most data governance teams are governance teams. They're not auditors, they're not the CFO, they're not the risk committee for a bank that will, shut you down if you break the Reserve Bank rules. Uh, they're trying to do the right thing, but they're not empowered to govern. And that for me is the problem.
See, that's where I'm saying that skill set comes very obvious over here. When I say, of course, you are right. Data governance comes under the domain of governance, right? And there are financial governance, there are many other governance in the organization. Can you believe that in a financial governance strategy is built by non-finance guy? You can't think about it. The same way I feel for data governance, it has to be built by data guys. What you're saying is absolutely right because I have been working in organizations where I was not part of data governance. We never follow their policies. Reason being, we always have way to justify, right? Because they are not data people. That is where my obvious first prerequisite is if someone is building a data governance team, data people need to be there and senior data people because it's about law. You have to implement a law. Law can only be
Mm,
implemented if people understand the law. Otherwise, people will bypass the laws. That's not my point of view.
yeah, I'm going to disagree with you again.
Yeah.
And the reason, and I haven't thought about this, right? And so I'm kind of speaking as you're making me think. So
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you. I go back to as data professionals, we have no practice, we have no rules, we have no certification that we're held accountable for. Therefore, we can't govern ourselves.
Mm.
What we are is we're good practitioners. And so thinking off the hoop, I think I've seen CFOs, chief financial officers, being the best data governance people because they come from a practice of governance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like you said, they're not data professionals, so they can kind of know what to govern, but not how to make sure it is governed,
Yeah.
right? And so I go back to let's use the car analogy. The rule is I can't drive more than 100 k's.
Yeah.
Yeah, uh, that's the rule, right? That's the governance in this area. Well, actually, as a car manufacturer, why don't I limit the car to never going over 100 k's? That doesn't happen, right? And it's the same with data. Like, yeah, I can't do this, but everybody does. So I think that's the problem. And then we come to LLMs, like they follow the rules as much. They're non-deterministic. So, but everybody's trying to make them deterministic. So let's say we finally get that right, and it'll be really interesting to see if we ever do. The second problem we've got to solve is the rules aren't clear, right? They're not described in a way that if the LLM was deterministic, it actually knows how to follow it. And that is a problem we've had for 30 years. If I drop into an organization and I say to them, what are the rules? I get a conversation. I don't get a set of rules.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem that teams have struggled with. And that's why I come back to this idea of pattern templates. And what I mean by that, and the canvas was just one of them, is if we have a thing that we fill out or do as we're doing the work, and that tells us whether we're meeting the governance rules or not, we kind of make a whole lot of problems go away. Because the first problem is I have to understand what I'm filling out, right? Like I'm filling something out. I have to understand what that process is.
Yeah.
So if I have to fill out a conceptual model, of just concepts and relationships, customer orders product from store. I have to understand how to fill out that concept model, that template, but I actually have to understand what a core concept is. Like, how do I define what a customer and a product and a supplier and a store is? How do I define that relationship? But once I've done that, now I'm by default, I'm just going to start to get a template that's got some data in it that can then test the policy of we will only define customer once.
Mhm.
Yeah, probably a principle or a pattern, not a policy, right? Because you won't get fired for doing it wrong. But that's kind of where I'm at the moment, right? And so what I think from a data governance lens, if the data governance team can't believe the true stakeholders that are accountable for that governance being applied, then they've got to be enablers, right? They've got to have ways of giving pattern templates and ways of working in patterns to the data teams so that those rules are complied with. And that's kind of where my head's at the moment, right? Is giving teams things that if they follow those things, the rules are automatically applied for them or flagged when it's not. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I'm still in the mid of thinking of that one, right? So that's why there's not 100% clarity on that one.
No, absolutely right. Because I'm trying to tag this data foundation with governance and management. Because let me bring another flavor for your food for your thought, right? Uh, Metadata. Let's bring metadata because for me, the data foundation which we are talking about, as we mentioned earlier in this session, is your product canvas practices, all we discuss, decisions and blah blah blah. Those should be an obvious. Now those have surfaced because AI came up and start showing that what we are doing wrong. But those were supposed to be there. Those practices are supposed to be there. Now metadata, because metadata is also for me is key because when AI comes in, okay, let me say this example again, which I gave in my panel discussion last week. What happened? I left coding like 15 years back. But this vibe coding, everybody keep telling me, Mustafa, go and try. I never had a time. Now I'm a jobless, last few months, you know that. So I went into coding. I opened a tool called Cursor. It's a vibe coding tool. I started replicating LinkedIn. So it's an awesome tool. I gave it a LinkedIn URL. It replicated 50 to 60% of LinkedIn. Those things did not replicate it, which was not possible to open without a username. Else it replicated. It treated the whole data model underneath and it was working perfectly fine. Now the question is AI can create a product. Now what I did is I picked up that data model, put it into a different schema, and asked the same vibe coding to read that schema and create LinkedIn like portal. It could not do it because when it created that schema, it went from application front end and created back end. But when I gave it a back end, it could not create anything for me. It was a rubbish thing, right? Which gave me an idea that, hey, because metadata of those tables are not there, because when it created from LinkedIn, metadata was there, conceptual, it went back. It created business model, information model, it created logical model, it created conceptual model, or there are many kind of data modeling techniques. Backend, it created that, then it created a physical model, and works. Now, the second example which I had, it could not. Then what I did is I asked it to create a business model on top of it, information model, FCOIM, conceptual, logical. I created all those and mapped with the physical model. And then I asked it, go and create a portal. It 90% it created. So for me, if you end up giving AI, asking it to start creating a product, it will create. But if you build a foundation of data product, AI might not be able to because metadata is not there. So now correlating our topic data foundation, if we are we saying that creating modeling, like as I mentioned, business modeling, information modeling, all those things should be a separate practice. And that is the foundation which we are talking about. And we can argue there are so many data modeling, yeah, 3NF, star schema, data vault, focal, enter, hope. So many are there, right? If we are talking about, are we talking about only up to the logical foundation as a logical modeling? Because after logical modeling, physical comes in, and that is where AI is unable to do it. Are we saying that we should emphasize or spend time building foundation of data modeling up to logical, and which will be, by the way, part of the data governance? It's not data management. Data management comes when you go towards physical modeling. Are we saying that? Okay, you can comment on it. You can because for me, physical modeling can will always change because new tools and technologies will come up. Until unless we have a proper up to the logical model, then these things can be reused. Are we saying these are the data foundation we are looking for or not?
Okay. So that's a big question. So let's go back to the core preface that every part of our foundation is a Lego block. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're just small parts that we put together to work the way we want our team and our organization to work. And we don't want to spend 3 years building out all the Lego blocks
Mhm.
because 3 years of great fun, but no value to the organization. And we don't want to just do ad hoc shit where there are no Lego blocks that we can reuse later, right? So
Yeah.
we want to be in that dodgy middle ground. And we've got a whole lot of decisions like which Lego blocks are the most important? Which ones do we do first? Which one do we do second? What order do we need to do them? Which ones are small Lego blocks we can spend a little amount of time and that's okay? Which ones do we actually have to spend a little bit more time because it just involves it? So let's use that as our framing. And then let's go back to the blueprint, right? So we've understood our current state. We've gone and figured out our measures of success. If we spend this money and time, this is how the organization is going to change. We've done our team design. We know kind of how the team is going to be structured and where they live in the organization and the skills and roles they have. We've done our value stream. Yeah, we know kind of the process from when somebody has a problem, all the steps we're going to take, we think we're going to take till we deliver value. We have our data factory kind of sketched out. We kind of think this is the way the data will flow and some of those decisions. And we got some data principles, yeah, some kind of this versus that. We might have a couple of policies because we already know there's some bad things we shouldn't do. We probably don't have any patterns yet.
Mhm.
Then what we do is we then look at, for me, I look at kind of capabilities. Like actually, given all that, what do we actually have to put in place on day one to make some stuff work? You know, get some products out the door that are governed, you know, that are managed. Let's say managed, right? And so I kind of then that's where we start getting into tooling capabilities, technology now, right? Like I need something that does this. I need something that takes the data out of those systems and brings it into the platform because we've made an architectural decision that we're going to bring all the data into one place. Yeah. Now, it might be a lake, it might be a data warehouse, that pattern, right? We haven't made that decision yet. And when I've done that in the past, I've always said metadata is important, but we've always treated metadata as an exhaust, right? I've always gone and said, well, if we don't collect the data, we can't build anything really important. If we can't store the data, yeah, again, if we can't transform the data, yeah, and if I can't visualize or deliver something, that thing. And so I foundationally always came back to those moving parts as being the first moving parts, the first Lego blocks that have to be built out. Um, and then I'd bring in some development practices. I'd say, well, we want to be able to check our code in, we want to be able to deploy and test, and I'd bring in some other Lego blocks. And for whatever reason, metadata kind of always came last, right? It was kind of treated as exhaust. We do all these things, and oh shit, now I need a catalog, right? But over a wee while, I flipped my thinking and I kind of said, actually, we need to capture that stuff first and then hydrate everything else. Now, I'm just going to go bound us to some language again, right?
Mm.
So, 10 years ago, I talk about metadata. I talk about being metadata driven. Yeah. Tools that are metadata driven. Define the metadata, the tool does everything else. And then I kind of moved on to config. Yeah, it's config driven because we're kind of configuring how the system should work and it should hydrate everything else for us. And then last year, there's a big semantic war in the data world, which was basically semantic layer or context. Yeah, and I'm on team context, and I think we've won that argument.
Yeah.
Although our library sciences friends are now bringing in ontology taxonomies, OWL and RDF, and we're back into another semantic war. So I'm just going to use the word context, right? And the way I position it now as patterns in my head is we have business context. Yeah, so definition of a customer is business context. Our domains are business context. We have a whole lot of context that is relating to the way we run our organization. We have structural context, the way our tables are structured, the way our fields are structured, the way our systems, the things that I would have called metadata 20 years ago. We have operational context, the queries that have been run against our data, who accessed what data when, who exported what data when, what decisions. There's a whole decision logging kind of thing coming through now. So there's all this operational stuff that's really useful from a context point of view. And then we have agent context.
Mm.
The prompts that we give the agents, the skills that we give them if we're using something like Claude, the content that we give it to help reinforce some of the models, right? This context or things that drive the way the agents behave. And that's how I think about it now, right? And foundationally, I would start capturing parts of that as I go. But I'd flip the model. The way I think about it is we want to capture the context and then have that context drive everything else we do. So, give you an example. If we say we want to, based on all that, we decided that policies, that we're taking more of a town plan approach, and we want to put in place some policies, right, that are complied with as we built that town. Or even if we're doing pioneers, we say there's one or two policies the pioneers can't break. They can build a town wherever they want, but they can't build it on the land over there because it's owned by a different organization, right? So don't just no, you'll be fired if you do that. Everything else is on. How do we capture those policies as context? And then how do we hydrate everything from it? Yeah. So how do we say, you can't store customer name? Yeah, that's a policy. That's context. And then how do we hydrate a system that actually checks it's never been stored
Mm.
and automates that for them as a test? Yeah. And that's how I think about it. Right. So yes, I agree with you. Metadata first, but truly metadata first, right? We write the context first, and then the system builds itself as much as it can off that context. Now, if we don't have technology that can do that, that's fine. We define the context first, and then a human writes code that enforces that, uses that context. I think that's where we're going to end up in the new world, in the new data world. Is everything is going to be defining context first and then hydrating all the other moving parts that we used to do as humans over time.
No, you're absolutely right. Just to bring in same example which you're mentioning, right? That policies has to map with if you have a proper metadata down there, then you can attach your policies with the metadata. Like you give an example of mobile number or ID card or a name or a account number of the bank, right? You cannot make those visible as a policy. Now that policy need to be implemented somewhere by data management folk, which is engineers, right? Data engineers. Now, giving this policy to them, they are not good enough to understand the business. For me, this policy need to attach with the metadata because in metadata, I normally segregate business metadata, technical metadata, and operational metadata. I feel the foundation is business metadata because once you have defined business metadata, that won't change in an organization until unless process doesn't change. Business metadata is about processes, how everything works, what is the definitions of blah blah blah, all those things, and then policy attached to that particular business metadata. Now, when management folks comes in, this policy get attached into the development activities as well. That wherever, one example, wherever ID card is there, it has to be masked. So people don't have to think about it. Developer don't have to think about it because it will go through a maybe a lookup table or maybe something which automatically do it rather than developer has to manually do it. So that is where just to bring my thought process back that data governance has to be a little bit maybe coming era you think about it again in coming era data governance has to be from the perspective of business matter it has to be separate because if you give it to management team they won't care developers are
Yeah.
who are the developers python developer or sql developer they're developers we don't expect them as you correctly mentioned early in this session, is we brought other domain people into data domain and start doing developers because they don't care. And we should not put this responsibility on them to find out what they need to mask, what is the policies. We make it again a principle. Principle is follow all the policies. That can be one
Yeah.
principle.
Yeah. But let's take that scenario, right? So and this is why I go back to finance because I think they're well ahead of us in some of this. Um, you know, they have this idea. Oh, sorry. If I go back to governance, I see governance teams either taking one of two stances: they're auditors or they're coaches. If
Hmm.
they're auditors, what they say is, "Well, here's the policies, and I'm going to come in and actually audit you to make sure you're following them." If they're coaches, they're saying, here's the policy and here's patterns or tooling or things you can use that make sure that policy is enforced and I don't have to worry.
Hmm.
If I'm a finance auditor and I know that you're using a financial system and you have a P&L, yeah, that's a pattern based governance because I know that there's no way the P&L can not balance, yeah, because
Hmm.
there's things. And within the data world, I still like we don't have the idea of microservices for our tests, right? Global ones.
Hmm.
We have local ones, but we don't have a microservice that says, hey, that data, anytime we see something that has ID in it, an ID value, it's encrypted by default, right? The team doesn't have to care. And actually, we used to have that in databases. And when we went to file systems like Hadoop and now Iceberg and that, we kind of lost a whole lot of the free shit that we used to get that made our life easier. So auditors or coaches have systems that enforce what's right. And then if we're auditors, if I look at all people that do auditing, they actually have a plan on how they're going to check that control, that policy, right? What
Hmm.
do we do in data governance? We say, here's a policy, and I go, how are you going to go check that that's been enforced? It's the data team's problem, right? And again, we haven't solved that. I think the last thing for me is if I go back to this idea of context being defined first and hydrating everything, those capabilities don't exist yet. And
Hmm.
they don't even, it's not even that they don't exist in the data teams. We need them to exist at an organization level. So, if I say the policy is ID can't be stored in clear text, then that policy has to be automatically applied in my data platform, in my software as a service, in my operational systems, in my Excel spreadsheets, in my SharePoint, in my text file sitting on my local hard drive. Like it's a policy, right? It's not just a policy for the data team.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
And that idea of defining context and having it hydrate all our systems, I haven't seen that yet. Uh, I hope we get it one day, right? But I think it's a big technical ask to figure out how the hell you do that as well, right? But any step we can do which takes us away more and more away from this idea that metadata is exhaust context is exhaust. Like we kind of look at what the system did and said that was the context, and we flip the model to define the context and get the systems to follow that context as we do the work. I think that's a good change in our foundational. So coming back, as I talked about, the foundational technology pieces that I would always look to is data collection, data storage, transformation, visualization, and then a whole lot of other stuff around it. I'm now saying actually defining context early is the first foundational piece before I'll do any of those.
Absolutely.
So defining what source systems we have as context, where the data lives in them, and then have that hydrate the data collection of that data into my platform. That's what I'd do. Yeah. It's a change of thinking, and it's also a complete change of working.
No, no, absolutely. Just
Yeah.
to close this session, right? You are absolutely right that for me, at least, most of the people think that data governance is more towards only data people. I joined data governance with business as well. Data governance need to be implemented as much as in data side, as much in business side as well. It cannot be one-sided. And business side, we all know data steward is also become is one of the critical role in data governance that they have to work hand in hand with data governance team so they can make sure that business is also following the same thing. As you mentioned, it's not about putting policies on data folks. It's putting policy, even ID card, if it is shown into your email, it should not show. Even it is in your Excel, it should not show, which is on your desktop. So yes, there are a lot of technical depth or technical implementation need to happen with the governance. So just to repeat myself, it has to be business side, it has to be the IT and data side as well, following all those governance things. So I think we have covered most of the thing. I wanted to go to a data modeling as well, but we have already passed our dedicated time because data people are asking that when you just to throw in last question, right? People are asking when you talk about data foundation, are you talking about data modeling, physical data modeling, right? Even before logical, like let's go to one step back, conceptual data modeling, because logical data modeling is something which will normalize the tables and entities up to the level it can be implemented, right? People asking me that data foundation, are you saying that we should finalize our decision that it will be star schema, it's a data vault, which kind of data modeling we need to implement? Is that your foundation? Just the last question.
So I think we have a foundational Lego block of our data architecture layers. How
Mhm.
many layers, staging, raw, whatever we're going to call them. Are they enforced or are they optional? How does the data move through a system? That is a foundational piece we do early because it kind of sets the scene for work we're going to do later, and it's harder to change later than it is to define up front.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm co-writing a book on conceptual modeling right now with Yoha Coppola, so I'm very, very opinionated on this. But if I go back to this idea of context and hydration, my view is a conceptual model is one of the foundational pieces that I would now bring in very, very early into if I was as I was part of data governance. Then logical modeling, it has some value, where do the attributes fit? And then physical modeling, it's important, but what I would do is treat it as a cattle, right? So I would say, if I use the DevOps terms, my conceptual model is my pet, and then I should be able to hydrate a physical model from that conceptual and logical model whenever I felt like it. Yeah, data vault, dimensional, one big table, activity schema, right? I should treat those modeling techniques as disposable now because my conceptual and my logical models are my business context, and those physical ones are my structural context. So that's how I think about it now. But most people don't, right?
I'm
So
absolutely with
then,
you on this one. I'm absolutely
yeah,
with you. Yeah.
if you don't think about that way, then you need a pattern or a policy on your physical modeling technique because you're losing all the value of doing the context stuff up early. So yeah, pick one. Yeah, and just be clear: is it a pattern, like I should use Data Vault, or it's a policy? I'll get fired if I don't use Data Vault. Right? Which of those? Which of those two are you telling me? And then I take your point about governance, right? So I was just kind of thinking about it as you're talking about it, and I'll kind of give you an example to close it out. there's a lot of work around in the data domain right now around data contracts.
Yeah.
And again, let me anchor my terminology, right? A data contract is an agreement between somebody on the left and somebody on the right on how they're going to share data. Yeah, so it discusses schema, frequency, quality. It is an agreement, right? And then we
Hmm.
test that that agreement's been met.
Hmm.
Typically, it's an agreement between the software engineers and the data engineers because we're moving data from a software system to the data platform. But I've seen lots of people now using it internally within the data platform between ETL jobs. Yeah, it's a contract, an agreement that this table will look like this and this table will look like this, and therefore I can write the code in between. If we think about that in terms of true data governance, the data governance team should be mandating that data contracts are put in place whenever data moves from a software system to a data platform. And they should be auditing that it actually happens.
Absolutely.
But we don't.
We
I
don't do
never
it.
see that, right? Yeah, it's always a data team thing, right? It's a tool for them. But actually, let's just think about that, right? From a governance point of view, when we go and we go and buy something from a supplier outside our organization, most organizations have a procurement team that govern there's a contract in place, right? And we know what we're getting and what we're paying, and there's a legal agreement. That data contract is exactly that, but for data. And therefore, in the way you think about it, the data governance team should be responsible for making sure contracts are in place and either auditing that they are or giving patterns to make sure they happen by default. So yeah, I'm like that. So yeah, contracts, data modeling, they're all foundational pieces.
Yeah, yeah,
For
yeah, yeah.
me, I'd focus on conceptual and logical and treat physical data modeling as just a execution problem. It's cattle. I should be able to change my mind and the system should just absorb it, right? I don't think we're there yet, right? But I think that's where we're going.
I wanted to close this, but I have to throw one more question. As you mentioned, you're writing a book on conceptual modeling. Because again, for me, the anchor is conceptual and somehow a little bit logical as well. But conceptual is something which is whole business up to conceptual and then goes to the management side, right? When you talk about conceptual, are you saying that conceptual model, of course, need to have a business modeling, information modeling, all those techniques, taxonomies, and all those things? Are you in your book? By the way, when your book is coming?
Uh, I don't have a date. Yuhar has been much better at writing his parts of it that we need than I am. So I am dragging the chain and I'm trying to get that chain pulled up a lot faster. So
Okay.
yeah, no idea when we'll be done on that one.
Okay. So now when you say conceptual modeling, are you considering all business modeling, information modeling, all those things up to the conceptual modeling? Are you saying that as a foundation? Last question.
So so the book's called Modeling Business Concepts, and it's
Okay.
called that specifically for a bunch of reasons. And the 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 goal of the book is to teach the steps that you need to create a concept model,
Okay.
right? And so we're kind of just working all the way through like, what does that actually mean? And so we've identified 11 steps, right? So the first step is define the domain that you're going to work in. Like, don't model the whole organization, try and figure out a domain. The next step is find a subject matter expert. Yeah, find somebody in the organization that knows how the organization works, and they're going to give you the information you need to define those concepts. And then we go through, and it it has the idea of where we define the concepts and we define the relationships, and then we identify where those relationships and concepts are an event, a core business event. Customer orders product. The order is something that was really important to us. And then we have a visualization that we're working on, like how do we draw that map, that concept map? What does it look like? And what we're doing is we're kind of both aligning that map to what a conceptual data model map looks like with a few tweaks,
Mm.
because that's how we think about it, right? That's how our expertise and experience has already done it. What's interesting is I often use an event matrix, kind of like a bus matrix, but a version of it that I kind of got from Lawrence Core and his Beam stuff. And so I'm always looking at it going, yeah, we're building this concept map, but actually maybe an event matrix is another way of articulating that. And I think we'll end up with just the core we're teaching is the concept map, but we'll use those event maps and those other visualizations as a different lens. The thing I struggle with is what does a business model look like? Yeah. Because I always think business map, concept map, logical, physical, right? That's in my head. But I've struggled to find a business. I mean, the business canvas is kind of a business map, but nobody really treats it that way. And so, yeah, I'm really intrigued. If you can find somebody that goes, well, the thing we do before a concept map is a business map. What does it actually look like? That'd be a cool piece of content because I struggle to find a pattern or a pattern template that makes sense to me. So I'm not sure I answered your question on that one because we're still writing it, but that's kind of where we're at.
Answer, because when you say conceptual, you are looking towards before conceptual, because conceptual doesn't come from the air. It has to come from business, as we said. So
Right. Yes.
it
Yes.
has to come
So
from
so
business. Yeah.
yes. So when we talk about a concept map, it is a representation of the way the business behaves, not a representation of the way the data is stored. Yes. So we should be able to do a concept map without ever looking at a source system,
Yes.
ever looking at a database.
Yeah. And just to answer you, to find out, by the way, in my latest book, I am Datapedia, I have added 37 data modeling techniques. So over there, I go step by step. Maybe I can share with you. You already bought my previous book, right?
Probably. I've got a whole bunch of books sitting left to me in
So,
paper, and I've
yeah.
got a whole folder of books I've bought in PDF. And
So,
it'd be
yeah.
fair
So
to say I have.
yeah, so
Yeah.
whoever have bought my previous book, I'm giving them free my latest book. So let me pass you my PDF of the latest book. Actually, over there you can go into it, have a look. 37 techniques. So wherever conceptual there, before you can go and see all those techniques, what they do. I spent a lot of time because someone asked me how many techniques are there. We have worked only five, six techniques. Normally we work 3NF, star schema, snowflake, data vault, logical, physical, these we work. But actually, when I really went into it for my book, I discovered there are 37 data modeling techniques. I said, wow, most of them I didn't know.
So you know how you said that you kind of went started vibe coding and you picked LinkedIn. Yeah. So it's kind of what I find is whenever a wave comes, right, the best way for me to understand the impact of a wave is to learn by doing. And so of course I always used to talk about can't code, don't code, won't code, right? Like I tried to code in my early days. I was the worst coder there ever was. But I thought, well, okay, we've got this new world. I'm going to go try and vibe code something. And so the obvious candidate for me was I vibe coded the information product canvas. Yeah, so I vibe coded a small app, which means you can do it online, and then I published it as an open source thing, so you can download it and use it and hack it and do whatever you want. Um, and then because I've been doing a lot of work on this idea of context and context plane, I was like, oh, well, maybe we'd extend this out. So I vibe coded the business model canvas and a lean canvas. And then, of course, I couldn't stop myself and I started vibe coding the business event matrix, the data layout architecture checklist, a concept model, a data dictionary, a glossary. But I purposely kept them all separate little apps, right? Because I'm testing this theory that these little micro apps, if you use them in your day job, have value and store and capture context without you really realizing you're doing it. So if you've got 37 different patterns for the way we can diagram or canvas things, yeah, I'd love to work with you on it that we kind of just create little bespoke apps for these and publish them as open source. Because I think seeing by doing, like being able to fill out one of those things is a great learning mechanism for people to go, oh, when you talk about a concept model and you're talking about concepts and relationships and that's it, right? No boxes and lines and a bit of cardinality. I kind of get it now. Like I got a lot more questions, but I've kind of played with something and it's visual and I think I kind of get what you're talking about. I think that's a great way of rounding out the learning in our domain that we've missed or lost. So yeah, if you're up for it, once flick me your book, I'll have a look at it and then I'll come back to you and go, let's vibe code together. You have to move to Claude, not not cursor. But yeah, and maybe we'll do them and publish a couple and see what happens.
Same thing. Cloud is and Cursor, same thing. Both have
Yeah.
LLM behind it. Cursor is people like me who have lost development like 15, 20 years back. I can't do coding in VS Code. So if you are using Claude, you need to have VS Code as well. So I don't want to go into there.
No, 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 no. I use the Claude Code GUI.
Uh,
I can't go into that terminal thing or VS Code.
yeah,
No, no. I go into something that looks like ChatGPT and I go like I did one last night. I went in and said I want a small app for metric trees, and then I went to bed. And this morning I got a really bad app for metric trees, and now I'm yelling at it, telling it what it needs to fix. So yeah, I mean, there's this interesting thing, right? That in theory, we can create this context layer for these apps, like the decisions and those kind of things that are being used when that app gets written. Back to your idea of build me LinkedIn and hold the context of LinkedIn, not the physical data structure. And if we do that, then in theory, we can have Claude or Codex or Cursor or any of these things read that context of that app and then update it. But I've tried it, and again, I tried it a while ago. So what happens with the new stuff is you have to try everything every week because something bloody changes and it gets
yeah,
better.
yeah.
But what happened was the coding LLMs argued. Like Codex would go, oh, Claude obviously wrote that shit, and it would refactor the code without making anything of extra value. And I kind of liken it to humans. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but you walk into a brownfield site and the engineers that built all the ETL are gone. And the new people came in and they typically go, oh, that's not the way you write that code. And they'll refactor all the code so it writes the way they normally write it, but it hasn't changed anything. It doesn't run faster, it doesn't run safer, and it hasn't added any new products to. And so I find that LLMs are, funnily enough, doing that as well. So yeah, we could give it a go. I'll get you to point
I
cursor
can,
at it and see what it does.
yeah, I can share it with you. I created a training as well. It's not very polished, but I'll share with you. I had to polish it, but you can have a look. All 37 techniques are in there. I gave some
Yeah,
examples, and I'm planning to create agent for each. Actually, I created agent for first 4, 5 techniques. It really, it was awesome because I talked, it narrated into a text. That text was in first prompt for the first modeling. That modeling created an output that one agent. That output was an input for a next agent, which will do the second modeling. So it was so awesome. And when I gave it to the cursor, because all metadata was there, it was able to create the application very good. But it was such a big effort because someone has to create 37 agents. I didn't have a
yeah.
time. I learned in 4 5 that it will work. So maybe I'll share with you.
Yeah, this is interesting thing on that is that lots of people are working now on skills for things like Claude, right? Where all the expertise sits in it, and they're really, really valuable. But there's no feedback loop. And because we know that the LLMs are still probabilistic, not deterministic, which means that you ask it the same question 10 times, one of the times you will get a different answer.
Yeah.
I'm still fundamentally believe we need a combination of the skills that do the work and visual techniques so somebody can understand the work that's been done. So in your scenario, a skill that I can ask it and it will create that model, and then a visualization of the model in a way that I can understand whether that model is correct or not. And that becomes the problem. Like, how do you know it's correct? Like, do you build another skill that tests it, what we call a judge mechanism?
Yeah.
Like, first skill writes it, second skill validates it. Yeah, we can't. We're still not ready to move to a world where those things are right, and therefore people without the expertise can just trust what it's giving them every time.
I think
But
the
hey,
validation has to be human. Why I feel it can be my own perspective that why I was successful because I knew what I want.
yes,
AI didn't knew because when I gave it a physical model, it didn't know. A physical model customer is just a 6 or 7 character word. It doesn't know what is customer until I gave it a metadata that what is customer and customer can be different for different domains. For HR, customer employee for HR is different. For a loan officer is a different. So I have to give a context. That is how it works. Never mind, I won't take you a lot of time. We already 1 hour 35 minutes. I just always Shane, I think it was a great session. It became more of a data governance session, but I think data foundation has a big play, or data governance has a big play in data foundation, because as we are discussing, you need to have right people at the right place, because you don't have a time to test and run and create something governance. I feel, which still contradict with you, is I feel that data governance team need to be separate, at least in this era, because AI is doing their own shit. Until unless right people do not know what they are doing, we are lost. That's my perspective.
If we say that data governance now behave like auditors or risk managers or the CFO, then I agree with you. Yeah, that actually it's outside the people doing the work and they are governing that that work is done
Yeah,
right.
that's what I mean.
That's a different pattern to what we see when we see data governance right now, in my view. Right
Right.
now, we see some people trying to do their best, but they're not empowered. Yeah, they can't fire people, they can't stop things happening, they can't delete data, they can't shut down systems. They don't have the power to govern like a council does if you're building a house, like a CFO has if you're paying for money, like a procurement team does if you're buying something. So yeah, I'm with you. We need to elevate governance to
Yes.
be governance and not management.
Yeah.
And then I agree with you, right?
Awesome. I don't want to go further before you you convince me further. Okay, thanks, Ken. It was a pleasure talking to you. I think we can have more sessions in the future. Take care. Have fun.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for having me. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.